So what I would like to know today is, we do get a lot of questions, is what is the difference between special levy and reserve fund levy? Maybe you can just put some light on that.
Well, definitely, Amore. I think first and foremost, it's important to distinguish between the two, because the one is basically discussed in terms of the Sectional Titles Act 95 of 1986. And the other is basically a newly introduced fund. If I say newly introduced, it's in terms of the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, which basically came into effect in 2016. Now, if you have a look at the special levies, is nothing new. Special levy is basically an additional levy that you charge, or the body corporate charges, in the event where a specific eventuality has taken place. Now, there are two requirements for purposes of a special levy. First and foremost, there has to be a matter of urgency. In other words, it is a specific unforeseen event that triggered this requirement for funding. For example, a wall that collapsed, or something that happened, the communal swimming pool becoming defective, or something to that effect.
Blocks, roofs are leaking or something, yeah.
Correct. So it is something that firstly is a matter of urgency, and secondly, it's not something that has been incorporated in the annual budget of the body corporate. So those two elements need to be applicable. What they then do is they will then declare a special levy to cover that unforeseen expense, and they will then divide that specific expense into the participation quota of each and every unit. So each and every party will then, by means of resolution, be compelled to contribute to that special levy, which is required to fix it up. But I think the major issue with a special levy is that it is not something that can stand over until the next financial year budget. It's not something that you can postpone. It's something that needs urgent attention, urgent repair, and for that purpose, they do not necessarily have the funds. Now, another specific fund that started running parallel with the special levy is the reserve fund, because a lot of the sectional title complexes have been misappropriating funds. I mean, let's face it, a lot of them have run into financial difficulty, spots of financial bother, and they just don't have funds to address the even budgeted expenses for. So the legislator said in 2016, what we need is we need, if you want to put it bluntly, a kitty. We want a spare fund, which is always there and needs to be maintained for these eventualities, where you've got a lack of funds, where there was a misappropriation, or where certain expenses need to be covered. Now, this is governed by the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, and more specifically Section 3(1)(b) of that Act. Although it doesn't prescribe a specific percentage, it basically says that if at the year end you have not got a reserve fund equal to 25% of the annual levies collected by the body corporate, then immediately the body corporate has to contribute at least 15% of the newly proposed budget for the following year. So that is where we get to the so-called 25% margin. That's basically a benchmark in terms of which we say you have to have a reserve fund in place, which is constantly replenished. So you can utilize those funds for expenses, which was basically unforeseen, and you can utilize that, but then replenish that funds, constantly keep it on at least a marginal rate of 25% of your annual levies that you collect. So that's majorly the difference. The one is for unforeseen eventualities, and the other one is basically a backup fund just to ensure that there are certain funds. But I think they run parallel with one another, and they are governed by different legislation.
And I think the thing is, with complexes, you see that it's like a little family household. So what they are teaching them, and have been teaching them for the past 5 years, is that you should save for unforeseen circumstances.
100%. And I mean, we've seen so many of these complexes that have been mismanaged. You know, a lot of them do not use qualified managing agents. They rather try and save a couple of rand and do it themselves. They don't adhere to the necessary requirements, and they might budget for something, but due to the misappropriation of funds, they just run out of funds. And that obviously poses a huge problem for the resale value of properties, because banks are now suddenly also requesting the financials of body corporates to find out whether they are safe and sound financially. And if not, you're going to battle to get a loan for purposes of any prospective buyer.
So what I advise people in when they're buying a complex is get involved. This is your money. You're paying it monthly. Beware of who you pick as trustees or people that will handle your money and the money of all the people living in the complex, because this is important. It will have a financial effect on you.
Undoubtedly. You're definitely correct. Yeah.
Thank you, Johan.
My pleasure.